So thank you everyone for joining this panel discussion. I'm Devjit Roy. I'm the co-chair for the Center for Transportation and Logistics. Along with me, we have Avi Dutt, who also manages the Center Administrative Activities. We're very excited to welcome you to the panel discussion on symbiotic relationship between transportation and real estate. The moderator for this evening panel discussion is Professor Prashant Das. He's a faculty in our finance area, and he's an expert in real estate, and we're very fortunate to have him moderate this session. So our esteemed panelists today, we have Professor Edward Coulson, who is a Director Center for Real Estate at the UCI Paul Merage School of Business. Professor Coulson teaches in the area of economics and public policy and serves in the school's Center for Real Estate as Director of Research. He received a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the UC Riverside and a PhD from UC San Diego, where he studied under the direction of Nobel laureate Robert E. Engel. He previously served as Professor of Economics and Director of the Light Institute for Real Estate Studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Prior to the university, he served as the Professor of Economics and King Fellow, Faculty Fellow in Real Estate at the Penn State University, where he received numerous outstanding teaching awards. Among the many topics, Professor Coulson has done research on the mismeasurement of rent in the Consumer Price Index and its implications for macroeconomic policy, the bias in residential appraisals, the impact of home ownership on people's lives and neighborhoods, home prices, multifamily housing and its management, historic districts, the relationship between REITs and the other asset markets, and many others. He has also written several books. For example, he has co-edited the book of Energy Efficiency and the Future of Real Estate. In addition to his extensive research, Professor Coulson has also served as the co-editor of numerous journals and served as the president of the American Real Estate and Urban Economics Association in 2016. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much.
Our next esteemed panelist is Professor Anil Kashyap. He is the Director General at NICMAR University, Pune. Dr. Anil Kashyap is a founder, president, and chancellor of NICMAR University, Pune. He has 30 years of experience in practice, academia, and research, both in India and abroad. In his leadership roles, Dr. Kashyap has been head of the UW Bristol School of Geography and Environmental Management, deputy head of Coventry University School of Energy, Environment, and the Construction. And he was also the founding professor and director of Riggs School of Real Estate before joining NICMAR as a Director General in September 2021. His expertise includes infrastructure development and finance, urban regeneration, and real estate research. Dr. Kashyap holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering with distinction from NIT Kurukshetra, master's in urban planning from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and a PhD from University of Ulster, UK. He's a fellow of Higher Education Academy of the UK. Dr. Kashyap has published over 100 papers in peer-reviewed journals, international and national conferences till date. He's also supervised 5 PhDs and has been examiner for PhD students in India and the UK. Welcome, Professor Kashyap.
Thank you, Devajit.
Our other esteemed panelist is Mr. Loknathan Nagar. He's a senior vice president and national head corporate affairs at the Welspun One Logistic Parks Private Limited. Lok brings more than 20 years of varied expertise in project approvals, environment clearance, on-site construction management, bid process management for public-private partnership projects, project development and operations management, project structuring on PDPP and PPP formats. He has also played pivotal roles in destination building, private capital raising, project management, and managing AIF venture capital, regulatory and policy advisory, financial advisory to both central and state governments. His last assignment was with Mahindra Lifespace Developers as business head. Prior to this, he was an independent consultant and was also associated with the Vadhva Group in various roles as CEO and head infrastructure business and CEO Township Developers India Limited. Welcome, Mr. Nader. And we also had Mr. Anshul. He couldn't join because of a last-minute emergency, but we are very excited to host all our esteemed panelists along with our faculty, Professor Prashant Das. So thank you all for joining. I'm very excited to the panel discussion. I'm sure you're as well. So we'll give the floor rather to Zoom to all the panel members and our Professor Prashant. All to you.
Thank you, Devjit. CTL indeed is such a wonderful platform to bring in experts from multidisciplinary backgrounds and conduct sessions like this. I will recite 2 lines by poet Fatima Hassan. कि जाता है जो घरों को वो रास्ता बदल दिया, जाता है जो घरों को वो रास्ता बदल दिया, आंधी ने मेरे शहर का नक्शा बदल दिया. The point is, can we imagine roads without clusters of buildings they connect, or buildings without a transportation infrastructure connecting them? Transportation infrastructure serves clusters of real estate, but has an immense impact on development, valuation, and location of real estate assets. So here comes the twist. Real estate is dominated by private ownership, while transportation infrastructure is a public good. So our very old friends from Greece found it to be yet another interesting topic of debate. Plato said that private ownership leads to social divisiveness. And his student Aristotle, as always, contented by saying that private ownership promotes prudence and responsibility. So how about balancing these 2 contending viewpoints by talking about real estate and transportation together? That precisely is the idea for today's panel discussion. These 2 asset classes are so deeply intertwined that some projects such as the Bengaluru-Mysuru corridor are jointly positioned both as real estate as well as infrastructure projects. But if we look around our modern cities, most airports, new international airports in India too, have a joint positioning, both as real estate assets as well as infrastructure related assets. So today's discussion brings perspectives from 3 experts specializing in infrastructure, real estate, and project management. We will facilitate a confluence of topics related to policy, financing, and valuation in the space of transportation and real estate. So without much ado, Dr. Coulson, let's start with you. How does transportation infrastructure relate to real estate valuation?
Oh my goodness, how much time do I have? Well, what is the mantra of real estate? What are the 3 most important aspects of real estate? They are location, location, and location. And the point there is that real estate is not simply valued, certainly not the land on which real estate sits is valued not for itself, but for its accessibility to other locations, things you want to go to. And so access is key to real estate valuation. And therefore, the facility with which that access is acquired is important too, and that's where transportation comes in. If you can't get from one place to another very easily, then the value of that access is basically nothing. And so transportation and real estate are extremely intertwined with one another. We our basic urban models, our basic understanding about cities and real estate revolve, at least initially, around the fact that there are places of employment, there are places of consumption, there are places of production that are central to a city, and access to that center is valued. And so the most basic of urban models is what's called the negative rent gradient, which suggests that property values decline as you get farther away from the center of a city. But the rate at which they decline depends precisely on the cost of transportation to that center. And that, in turn, depends on the transportation infrastructure. So it's a very, very basic, fundamental connection between real estate and transportation technology.
I've come across a few papers, some of your own works as well, wherein it's in public domains, it's very widely and deeply acknowledged that transportation is going to have an impact on real estate value. Could you throw some light on some recent regulations that sort of put the policy intervention perhaps on the transportation side, but with a view to enhance real estate valuation?
Well, policy, I'm not so sure, except the policy of making transportation infrastructure more efficient, and therefore more valuable to the real estate that it's serving. You talked, maybe I'll just digress a little bit. You talked earlier about the distinction between public and private on the one hand and transportation and real estate on the other, with the suggestion that real estate is private and transportation is public, but that's not necessarily true. It is possible to privatize a road network, especially the road networks that have limited access, what I would call a freeway, but which goes by various names around the world. That can be privatized and therefore be made efficient, I scare quotes, efficient in some broader sense. And that's a policy which doesn't meet a lot of favor in the United States, but which can be used to improve the efficiency of the transportation network.
Yeah, very true. In fact, some of the earliest road transportation funds were established in the US, and then the whole model was later adopted by the rest of the world. The privatization of infrastructure, I mean, road infrastructure in particular, has seen tremendous transformation in recent years. So in the early years when there was excessive dependence on public sector investment, as you rightly pointed out, in recent decades, the private sector has come forward and made a lot of investment in it. So allow me to continue this discussion with Dr. Kashyap. Anil, what are some prominent transportation related land value capture stories in India? I mean, first, if you could enlighten the audience about what is the concept of land value capture?
Yeah, Prashant. See, it's a very interesting, combination of real estate, transportation, even some of the public policies, as well, when we look at this particular symbiotic relationship. Land value capture is not recent. It has been very historic as well. You talk about the civilizations earlier as well. You hear that in Greek civilization and even, those times back as well, when any of the viaducts or any bridge was constructed, the collection of levy, revenue, and all that was done from there. And that was not in terms of, some of these instruments, what we normally talk these days, but even, small pennies or some sort of crops normally, or, whatever barter system, all that was very much prevalent. And that what I would relate that to some sort of land value capture, as well as because of the improvement of the infrastructure or connectivity. And then coming back to
that's very interesting a perspective, Anil, because if that levy was going towards a democratic institution, it was clearly a concept of land value capture. But our perception about levies in those days is sort of overwhelmed by these, sort of usufructuary systems where, there was a king who would exploit the society, and then the levies were purely going in the deep pockets of the king, which wasn't really
absolutely, because that was the sort of the governance system at that point in time. And if we take that on the face value, the governance would have facilitated some of these infrastructure by collecting those levies, etc. But that's it, like a very old anecdote which I started with. But if we look at the recent ones as well, and globally as well, many major infrastructure projects, they have got benefited and have used land value capture to finance the municipal administration or even the project itself. And in my own paper, which I wrote with Jamittal in 2014, A Tale of Two Cities, where we compared Ahmedabad Ring Road development and NCR Kundali Manesar Palwal Highway, which
So
was in
NCR stands
Haryana.
for National Capital Region. For our
National
international
Capital.
audience. Yeah.
Yep. So these two projects were compared in the in that paper which we wrote in 2014. Very interesting outcome and very two distinct projects. In case of Ahmedabad, this land pooling and use of restructuring of the plots and along the highway, and then selling some of the land for commercial land for generating some revenue, giving out about 60% to the landowners. All that made a really interesting mix, and it was an architectural or a planning sort of example as well, where the plots were all developed and all regularized. It was very interesting model. But one of the conclusion in that paper was that when this kind of land value capture are only possible when the real estate markets are really ripe. They cannot be transferable. These experiences are not transferable anywhere, simply because the drivers are a couple of other things as well: the political will, the local people support, community support, as well as the maturity of the land market. So that's how this experience has been quite interesting. And similar way, this Surat.
So allow me to interject here.
Yes.
You made
Yes.
a very interesting point. That's music to my ears as a student of real estate. I like to hear when you say that land value capture is only effective when real estate markets are already ripe. But by design, if the land value capture applies to the transportation, the main idea is to bring in these assets so that real estate values could increase. So we are precisely talking about the symbiotic relationship, as Dr. Coulson also referred to here. So I remember reading your paper of the Ahmedabad one, but didn't you later also do a paper on Hyderabad and Surat Ring Road?
I did a study. It wasn't published, but I think those are two different. Surat is very similar to what Ahmedabad has done. In terms of pooling the land, making the parcels. So similar kind of government support, government mechanism and law of the municipal corporation. Those are really the policy regulations of the municipal corporations were very helpful in both cases, because in the state of Gujarat. But Hyderabad has been a different different model, which was more build, design, operate, finance, and transfer. So those kind, and it is mainly collecting the toll. Toll revenue is sort of the way the financing of this particular project has happened, but very distinct, very different model, and the story between these two experiences.
Yeah, so for the uninitiated in the room, by design, the concept of land value capture is a broad concept wherein we bring in public infrastructure, which incurs some costs, but that infrastructure enhances the value of the real estate assets that are going to be consumers of that asset. For example, creating a new ring road or a new access road through the city, through an old city. And as Dr. Kashyap has pointed out, how do we finance that new infrastructure can be done in many different ways. So you gave examples of 3 different cities, and you hinted that their financing models were different. So how were these new infrastructure developments financed could be different across the projects. So Lok, you are an expert in warehouses, and beyond transporting public and people from one place to another, transportation also connects warehouses from one city to another. And especially in the kind of economy that we are living in today, the importance of warehouses has substantially gone up in recent years. So when you are thinking about coming up with a new warehouse facility, which to me is a real estate asset, and technically it's also an infrastructure asset, perhaps in India. So what aspects of transportation do you analyze? So suppose you're going to select a site in some part of India, which aspects of transportation would you be concerned with?
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. Before jumping into warehouse, I think I would like to just add one more point which Anil had just answered on. Especially, if you look at the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, that was one of the transformation which brought in Pune as an entire city. Because when we were benchmarking it way back in the year 2000 and 2001, the whole idea was if we reduce the commute time, it's going to explore the entire city as a whole. So whether it was finance, see, Mumbai-Pune Expressway is a classic example of, whether it has to be through a PPP model or otherwise, and lot many things has happened. And finally, it ended up that a complete corporation was created to develop a particular project. But the result is a huge real estate boom in Pune as a new city. IT as a sector. Employment, today when you look at Pune, it's a complete IT infrastructure which is actually backed. And the amount of employment that it has transformed.
And tourism as well,
Yes.
right?
Tourism,
so it's become so easy for people to travel from Mumbai, drive all the way to many hilly areas.
Just to add on as a case study, that has been a classic case study when we have been looking at a tale of two cities again between how do you shift Bombay team to Pune, and it is one more creating a town which is close by. Secondly, how do you finance? All the newer methods at that time were explored to ensure that the financing happens, and a complete new city as Pune, developed and came up. So I just thought, just let me add that to what Mr. Anil said. So in terms of sorry, sir, you want to add something, Anil, to that?
No, that's fine. I think those are quite interesting example. It's all over the place actually, and very interesting study can be done through these experiences. Yeah,
absolutely. And when we were also structuring a very basic infrastructure of how do you ensure that the entire Bombay traffic which moves from north to south, you can increase the speed of it by just ensuring that they jump the signal or have a flyovers it, and how do you fund for it? And finally, you see that it was used by adding a cess on the diesels and petrol. So that was a fantastic innovative structure that was put in there. The first 55 flyovers, which was done by MSRDC, and the fuel. So innovative structure enabled a lot, ensured that transportation helped, and it actually opened up the market, not towards the whole idea was to shift the entire team. Because when the office goers are actually going to Nariman Point from Borivali, so how do you do that? But what happened is it brought in the entire development towards Borivali and thereafter. So today, when we see that the housing development that has happened or explored to Borivali, Palghar, and towards Virar, that's all thanks to that small infra. When we were doing the financing aspect of it, how do we finance it? It was very difficult to put it all at one point of time. But today, when we look at it, how the value capturing has happened towards the suburb, it's mind-boggling. When we look back 20 years back, and today when we see that these projects has created such marvels, then absolutely, transportation network creates a huge amount of value.
Interesting, because this idea of capturing value has to some extent been formalized in the US. And I remember people having very hard debates on some of these topics in the US as early as, the dawn of the 21st century. So I will move to Dr. Coulson. Dr. Coulson, I remember reading about tax increment financing in the US. And, as a newcomer to the US academia, I was very fascinated by it. Could you help us understand how PIF works?
Normally, the kind of standard model for TIFs, as they're sometimes called, is a little bit different from what I'm hearing, but in essence, it's the same idea as land value capture. The idea is normally a group of real estate entities. When we talk about TIFs in particular, it's usually a commercial district, and the owners of the property in that commercial district actually take a vote and to pay for additional public services and agree to be more heavily taxed to pay for these kinds of services. So it normally is about public safety, sanitation, litter control, those kinds of things, and it's limited to a specific district within a city. So New York City, for example, has probably 100 of these TIF districts. It's a little more difficult to do this with transportation infrastructure because the people who benefit from this are not confined to a particular space, but in fact, it's a whole city. And so the real key for a transportation-oriented TIF is an efficient administration of the property tax, because if you have frequent revaluations of property, reassessments of property, there's no need for any kind of special land value capture efforts. It will, the benefits of the transportation infrastructure will accrue to the whole city. The whole city, or at least some big part of that city, will have land value, property values rise, and without any change in any kind of property tax statute, except for fair assessment of the tax, that will, if not pay for, it will at least capture the benefits of that transportation infrastructure. So TIFs are easy when they are limited things which benefit a very few entities. Transportation's a little trickier, but again, with the right administration of the property tax, it could very easily be done.
Yeah, that's an interesting viewpoint that I had not thought about. That in a way, the land value capture models in India are sort of a workaround to a relatively less dynamic property tax regime. So indeed, in India, property taxes are often a function of what we call as the circle rate. And in many municipalities, circle rates take a long time to be updated. So what you're arguing is that if the property tax rates or the mass valuation of assets is done more frequently, then mechanisms like TIF could very well be a reality in India. And I remember, I think when they were doing Hudson Yards project in New York, they were considering to raise capital through, if I'm not wrong, some sort of a TIF bonds, where people subscribe to bonds and the bond issuer issues them with an anticipation that in the future, as the values increase, the tax revenues will increase. That will help pay the coupons.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it arises from the fact that in the United States, I think India shares this problem. The property tax is not efficiently administered. I live in California. California is quite famous for the sclerosis of the property tax administration. It's horrible. And it's for those reasons that we need things like TIFs and other mechanisms to fund public projects.
Yeah, and in all fairness, given our challenges of lack of transparency in the real estate markets, I would say the tax regime here has been a welcome step. It's just that we need to work further in this regard. And like we do mass appraisals of assets in the US, some municipalities would do that, run some sort of a machine learning or hedonic pricing model for assessing taxes every year. I think we need to build those capabilities also and make our property tax system more, sort of elastic to price movements in the assets.
I'll add one more. Can I have one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
The politics of property tax administration are quite burdensome in the US. The people that would be most affected by property tax changes are the very people who tend to vote the most often. And I'm talking about senior citizens. The common objection to property taxes is, of course, is that the property is not liquid. And therefore, to have liquid assets in order to pay heavy property taxes is limited. There are ways around that, but they are politically unfeasible. And so we get the kind of maladministration of the property tax in the US and elsewhere.
Although in principle, the millage rate could change from year to year.
Well, in California in particular, and I'm more focused on this now that I live here, we have the legacy of what's called Proposition 13, which is a property tax limitation movement. So there's limitations on what the millage rate can be. There's limitations on how fast the assessed value can go up each year. And so I bought a house 5 years ago. My assessed value is way under my actual property value. And so there's some inequities there that are just built into the system. We do have ways around that. We have something called mellow roofs, which is like TIF for residential areas, but it's very, very politically difficult to get things moving even with that workaround.
Yeah, talking of politics in real estate, I guess every economy is a victim of some of these phenomena. In India, sometimes we have the opposite problem, that circle rates can be much higher than the actual value of the property, because these cities are just, projecting the future asset values. And within a region of the circle rate, property taxes should ideally vary drastically, but we don't have that kind of granularity when it comes to assigning property rate locations. So there are many things that we need to work on, but we are perhaps getting there over time. Anil, yeah, you want to add something?
Yeah. Just wanted to add here that simply the collection of property tax and the amount it is collected doesn't translate into the proportional development within the cities. And you would appreciate Pune Municipal Corporation is one of the richest corporation in the country. I think 15,000 crores of annual revenue through various taxations and other mechanisms. But still, Pune is not a finest city in terms of the road infrastructure. It is all broken and still getting fixed. It is the capacity of the municipal corporations and the local bodies that is mainly required to be built to understand, to conceptualize, to have these projects up and running and deliver it on time, etc. So yeah, just a side point to add away from
that's a very relevant point, Anil, because both road infrastructure and real estate falls in the domain of municipalities. And yes, I mean, the regime of property taxes, the ad valorem property taxes, often leads to agency problem. If municipality is supposed to represent the citizens, then the very fact that it benefits from higher property taxes leads to some degree of agency problem. And these are some classical problems that are seeking solution, perhaps from academics, perhaps from industry people like Lok that we have.
Yeah, just add, Prashant, here, it's a very, very valid point which has come up about the property tax. See, the 2 or 3 revenue streams that really comes in. One is obviously the property tax, which goes to the municipal corporations, and the second is obviously the stamp duty, which as a add-on gets to the revenue department. So what happens is when the city is born and it is just crawling, and there are so many transactions happening. So today the actual money that gets collected because of this city glorified, or the development that is happening, is the immediate residential sales which are happening for all the cities which has grown out. That's where the property tax actually going to be helping. But at the same time, what happens is the land deals have been less, especially if you go towards the old Delhi, especially when you look towards the city side. So the transactions are not happening, the property taxes are very high. And then obviously, it's an illiquid asset. So how do you do that? And that's what is happening in the developed economies also when we look around.
Yeah, it's a
national
universal problem. Yeah, very true. Yeah, and then I mean, in all fairness, the municipality needs revenues as well. So where does it get that from? If that is what you're trying to hint at. Yes. I mean, so let's get back to the idea of infrastructure financing, transportation infrastructure in particular. What kind of financing models are being used in India? So there is land pooling, there is revenue bonds by municipalities, or pay-as-you-go model. Is there any particular model that strikes you to be better than the other? Or you think they are all, I mean, suited to different realities?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Prashant. And let me begin with the basic preamble here is that land as per the constitution is a state subject. So India, we have got so many states. Every state has got its own planning policies, own regulations, how to regulate land and levy some sort of development charges or infrastructure, enhancement charges, etc., betterment levies. It is all down to states. So which means that you will not find something which is uniform across the piece in the entire country. That's one part, which is a policy sort of, and every state has got its maturity, different maturity level in terms of its planning infrastructure, its management of finances, own problems as well. They might have lots of deficit in their state exchequer where even similar revenue is collected that might go into some different directions in welfare schemes. So this is the sort of the governance and administration of finance perspective is concerned. Let's park that for a moment. But when it comes to total professionalism in terms of the delivery of infrastructure, it also varies depending upon which sort of zone or region, or I would say that land market. I'll use that same terminology, that what kind of real estate market we are positioned in. So, and the cities are in different sort of different land markets, tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities. They have got different dynamics. And the revenue generation cannot be uniform across those cities. So that's why you will find plenty of different models.
Yeah. So, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to add that academically, if we look at that, land value capture can have 4 different tools. One is fully public, fully private, and partially public or partially private. So and it can be summed up under these major 4 groups basically. And when you talk about fully public, then it is all about this land-based levies, where government has got its policies and they levy on external development charge or change of land use fees or some sort of betterment levies, and it is across the world, globe, here as well in UK and US. These levies are done. But the other perspective is which is more Indian context, is the fully private or public-private partnerships as well. Special purpose vehicles and all those things are created through soft loans. You will find all sorts of examples. Very interesting one where JICA, Japanese corporation, gives loans to Hyderabad Metro. And you have got some state funds up to 5% or 10% of the total value of the transportation infrastructure put in there in the kitty, and some air rights are given by the state government for development of the stations. So lots of models are there. So I would say that this is from a student of real estate and development. It is very fascinating that, and I must congratulate the center as well, that this topic was picked up, and we can even drill down to 1 or 2 examples in the subsequent sessions to get a better understanding of it. But very, very varied and interesting examples how infrastructure can be delivered in Indian context.
Indeed, Anil, given the many precedences in relatively in developed countries, and given the appetite in the entrepreneurial and investment sector we have seen in India in recent years, we should expect a lot of innovative financing models to come up in India and then also be successful. So before I move on to our discussion, why don't we entertain some questions from the audience? We have Mr. Vishal Dikshit, and he's asking, which comes first, transportation to newly coming real estate, or first new real estate development come and then transportation for common people come? This is a chicken versus the egg. Would anyone of you like to take a shot at this question, gentlemen?
Let me chip in here just very briefly. See, it is all about the perspective planning, and as a town planner hat, I would say that when you are having a strategic plan for a long-term horizon, it starts that symbiotic relationship, whether there is a proposed road or a corridor or something, and then the speculations starts coming in, and the people land aggregation and collection of the strategic positioning of the ownership, etc. So it all starts from that long-term zoning plans or the master planning of a particular area. That is the beginning, and then after that, whether it comes the road infrastructure, there are both stories as well. In case of Gurgaon, the developments have gone so far that there is no road to visit, and but the
and
other
Houston,
side is
Texas.
also, yes, exactly, and the other side of the story is also there, that there are fantastic roads but there are no development. So
Correct. So that's an academic question. My namesake Prashant BK is asking an interesting question. He says that the premise of real estate prices, depending on the distance from the city centers, is based on conventional modes of transportation. I mean, the one tune-in rings that Dr. Coulson was referring to. So how do you think the new technology like urban air mobility will affect this construct of bid rent curve?
Well, I think we're a long way from any serious kind of air-based intra-city commuting. We can easily, maybe I shouldn't say that. I suspect within 5 years or so, we'll have personal drones that can carry a human efficiently. So maybe I shouldn't be so blasé about this. But I think the bigger issue, certainly in the US, and I suspect in India too, is what are the implications of increased ability to work from home for desk workers? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's going to have a much bigger short-term and even long-term impact on the way transportation gets inputted into real estate prices. I mean, we can certainly see that a world in which there are very few office workers in these downtown areas, and most of the workforce is working from home. That means that the center of the city is no longer a production center, which has been its traditional reason for existence, but it will still be a consumption center. People will still want to go to the downtown area, but they're not going to want to go as often. But so unless cities, we're talking about policy, if this kind of thing turns out to be quite important, then it's going to be up to cities to turn themselves into centers of consumption rather than production, and not devote so much space to office, but more space to things, to entertainment, to restaurants and theater and that kind of thing. That's going to be the policy impetus for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because urban air mobility to me does not appear to be such a strong disruptor when it comes to human civilization, because but is it going to drastically change the way we think about bid rent curves in cities? I doubt, because in a way it's just a faster mode of transportation, much cooler one, but how is it different from, let's say, underground metros? I mean, they're still physical transportation modes. We are not talking about time warp as you mentioned.
Right. It depends on whether it depends on the regulation of this. If you can take off from your home in your own personal drone, then that decentralizes the transportation transportation network, and so we don't have the wheel and spoke model of traditional urban economics, which has arterial modes of transportation. So it'll decentralize that. That's one thing. On the other hand, you could imagine that there are going to be regulations which say, no, you can't, launch your drone from your house. You're going to need to do it from some centralized place where it can be regulated and made safe. So
yeah,
the future's a wonderful place. We haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah.
I think Prashant, what doctor has, the point that he has brought in is very interesting, because it's always, even when you look towards civilizations, it's always the transportation which has transformed things when people move from one location to another. But at the same time, when it is regulated, when you want that, you need to go to a common place, then take off your, whether you call it as a drone or you want to call it a short air jet. I think that's where the decision of go no go starts coming in.
Yeah, that also makes me wonder if this will add to the urban sprawl or make the world even more unsustainable, wouldn't it? Because now suddenly we are talking about people living anywhere and going to work anywhere else, unless this work from home phenomenon gets a strong impetus.
True. I think COVID has taught us very different things. Of one is working from home. That is like, when we speak about people who are curtailing their transit, even locally, I mean, they want to work within their premises. And even today, 60% of the staff, when it is IT, they are yet to come back to the offices. Okay. Mm-hmm. So knowing that is one of the patterns. See, human patterns actually decides what kind of transportation patterns also you are going to establish. So when you see this kind of liking, then is that by making a thing available, any person would want to jump out of his window and, take his drone off and start visiting places. Mm-hmm. What will be the total number of population that will be willing to do that? Today, mm-hmm. the average transit that any person locally takes is average 15 to 20 kilometers within the city. So that's the average that anybody does in Mumbai or any other developed city. So when you take the average of per person, then that's the kind of transit that person takes it. By making the faster modes of transport and the facility to move around by himself, whether that is going to bring out that transformation. And secondly, is that going to open up some other regions, actually, the unlocked pockets? It's not about people moving out from city, but also the fact that, other regional developments can also come in. People in Nagpur may not decide that they need to be in Mumbai. I mean, very next moment, they will pick up their drone, come out and, hop to Nariman Point and do their business and leave back. Right. Mm-hmm. So will that unlock the potential of so many other locations? That's a good question to ponder on.
Correct. So I see Avi has a few points to chip in.
Yeah. So primarily what we have seen in India is service economy. So cities like Pune is IT, Bangalore is a tech, Bombay is a financial hub. So all of these are service economy in many sense now, and there's a huge push for manufacturing, to building manufacturing in India. So how do you see, when a big manufacturing or production hub coming up, and how does it, because it's lumpy in nature, it's not, there's a whole set of investments that happen in that, and how do you plan the whole, from policy point of view, the whole real estate transportation problem in considering manufacturing coming up in a big way? And will US, countries like US, following them makes more sense, or countries like China, which are more of a manufacturing hub, the policies, do make more sense?
Actually, we need to go back to some of the earlier chapters of our civilization. What worries me the most is the urban sprawl in India. Cities just expanding like anything, but with a very organic pattern. So that kind of is related to my next question to everyone. That at some point we were talking about transit-oriented development. We're still talking about that in many parts of India, and that is aimed at reducing private vehicular traffic. There's a conflict between how we want our future to be and what the future looks like is going to be. So if we talk about these personal cabs and drones, people flying in drones, we are pretty much encouraging more traffic to come out. So right now, as if traffic on the street was not adequate of a menace. So now we are also planning to bring people to fly wherever. On the other hand, several land value capture projects encourage more traffic on the road. So do you think that in the community of transportation planners, there is a broad level conflict? Like on the one hand, one side brings to minimize traffic on the streets. We used to talk about new urbanism 30 years ago, which no more anyone is talking about. And on the other, we have a totally opposite view. What is your take on this? I mean, what does a sustainable future look like? So in terms of traffic, I mean, do we really want people to fly their own drones? Would that be a sustainable solution? Wouldn't that lead to urban sprawl, Anil?
Prashant, it's tricky, and this is not a new question. When I started my PhD in 20 years ago, Newman Kenworthy, they were talking about travel and sustainability and all, and still we are talking the same. I guess it all depends on where we are heading, with what kind of society we want to be. There are certain examples where the sustainability in the society, in the community, has been very primed. In Germany is an example where some cities like Freiburg, and they have got such a heavy sustainability agenda in terms of their travel, the solid waste management, etc. So means it depends on the kind of priority and preferences each city would sign up. Obviously, technology would add quite a different dimension to it. What kind of technology is there? What kind of workspaces? Whether I'm talking about 20, 50 years ahead of the time as well, because cities have got longer life. Yeah, so it's highly unpredictable, but I think it is down to individual communities, individual societies, what kind of life we want to live. And COVID is an example where up to some extent people have habituated to some sort of living, and it can be done as well. So sustainability, it can be achieved through common sign up of the agenda, but I think there is no immediate solution which I could see, what could be done to avoid this urban sprawl.
True. So one thing that really captures your eyes when you walk through the older parts of many cities in India is that the public system has a very well-intentioned idea of expanding roads and expanding streets so that more car and more vehicular traffic could go through the older parts of the city. I'm just not sure if that solution is a long-term solution. Does creating a flyover really create a long-term solution, or simply makes people temporarily happy? Only we are waiting for those localities to be a mess in the next 3 or 4 decades. Is that really the solution that we are looking at? What happens to the sustainability? How about well-being of the people? How about walkability of the streets? Does just expanding the streets is adequate? Are people in the transportation circles, the planners, are talking about these ground realities of citizens?
Particularly for India, Prashant, I think it is the sort of a situation where it is more reactive, where the population growth and the demand on infrastructure is so huge. By the time planner catch up with one idea, it has already gone out of proportion in the other front. This is particularly a challenge when we talk about India. But some of these solution does work in Western context. Walkable streets, even these business improvement districts, TIF and bids etc., they do bring a positive change. City centers in European cities are quite walkable, and I think there is a long-term benefit of those things if administered, properly. So I'm not negating those ideas, but I think the context is very, very, very different when we talk about where that can be successful and where that cannot be successful.
So, gentlemen, we have 3 minutes left for our presentation. Would you like to speak some ending notes, or would you like me to entertain some more questions from the audience? Luke, did you have any specific message about warehouses and?
Yeah, see, 2-3 things, especially see when it comes to warehouses and the way transportation is going to work out. So when it comes to the accessibility is going to be very, very critical, especially to the highway as well as the access. Whether the access as well as exit is very critical for any warehousing project. So in the case of transportation hub, whereby we mean in terms of ports or railways or terminals, then to achieve the operational efficiency, it is very important that how closer you are at the same time. But there are different kind of warehouses when you look at it, whether it is a last mile, whether it is an in-city, whether it is going to service or what kind of product that it is handling, especially in terms of whether you are handling a bulk product, whether you are handling an e-commerce product. So those kind of decision things actually comes into picture. So transportation plays a very, very, very important role here. One is what kind of transport. So if I'm looking at a bulk product, then obviously whether I'm closer to the railway network, whether I'm closer to the ports. Okay. For an e-commerce, obviously the highways are very critical. So deciding a location specifically for a warehouse, this becomes real challenging. And second,
sorry to interrupt. Savita Chilakumari is asking a very related question. She says that, on the one hand, we are talking about accessibility to warehouses and blue chip commercial real estate assets. But when the government develops sustainable housing projects in many parts of the country, they are not accessible altogether. So how do we address challenges like these? Does it mean that our idea about transportation infrastructure is obsessed with the commercial interests, or could it also be a social good? The question here, in my personal opinion, is that how do we finance it? We need a financing mechanism to do that.
So, one point I would like to say, since Savita has raised this question about, there are housing projects which are not connected. So warehousing actually comes at a second stage when we actually identify there is a potential there. So if there is an housing and there is a proper road network already established, that's where the warehouse starts promising that I can deliver within an hour, within half an hour, or within a day you will be able to do that. So that kind of pre-assessment actually happens. Whereas, housing as a potential, what happens is it's an aspirations. When you know that, okay, there is a development happening in the nearby sector itself, like Anil also said, when Gurgaon extended, even though the extension has just, ended a kilometer or a kilometer and a half prior, anticipating that there will be a lot of development coming in, there are a huge amount of housing projects which has come in without an access today. So that is definitely there.
So Dr. Coulson was mentioning about US moving from public financing to private financing of infrastructure. That perhaps is a signal that private financing tends to be quite efficient. I don't know if comparatively more efficient than public financing or not. But Gaurav Patel is asking which financing is more efficient in general when it comes to financing logistics projects or transportation infrastructure. I mean, if I was reading this upcoming book on financing infrastructure, and it clearly said that governments do not often have the financial wherewithal to totally sponsor infrastructure projects like this. So leaning totally on government funding in whatever means, through subsidies or through soft loans, may just not work because the government may not have so much of budget allocated for these projects. So perhaps bringing in private parties with robust financing models is the way to go, unless you have something to add to it.
No, I think public-private partnerships for things all kinds of large projects is absolutely necessary because they have both private and public returns attached to them. So it's only fair that these things, the financing gets shared according to the benefits that will be received. And it's critical for governments and planners to make sure that the public interest is served. One of the basic challenges we face is that real estate is decentralized ownership, generally speaking. And when you take on a development project, you don't always understand the social impact of that, and it's up to planners to make sure that they have the social welfare function, the balancing of people versus commerce, and keep that in mind. And I was going to add, since we're talking about warehouses, a very common thing in the U.S. is that when Amazon or some other large entity wants to build a large warehousing facility, they are obliged by the local government very often to improve the transportation network that surrounds them. And Amazon or whatever the developer does this willingly because there's so much surplus to be gained from constructing these facilities that there's room to take on the improvement of the transportation infrastructure as well. And this is both roads and public transportation networks.
Correct. So, gentlemen, I would like to close this session with one last question from our attendee, Chetna Rathi. And she is asking, what is the future of sustainable transportation? You could elaborate that in maybe one sentence. How do you see as the future of sustainable transportation? It doesn't have to be scientifically true because we are not going to bet it 20 years from now.
See, I think let me have a go on this one, Prashant. The key to the sustainable transportation is meeting the individual demands and needs of a particular community. Sustainable transportation would mean differently for a metro city to a small village or a small community or even an outside suburb. It has, there is no single model that we would apply, but there can be some certain principles for sustainable transportation, and these principles would vary differently for different places. So that's where it's a common sense basically that what kind of frequency, quality, low carbon, efficient, all those things, community friendly, all those kind of attributes would amount to a sustainable transportation. It is just not an environmentally sustainable, but it has to be socially economically, and other parts of that sustainable development should be incorporated into the future of transportation. So it is a combination.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have an uncanny similarity of views here. That sustainable transportation will be about people. It's not about crowding the cities with new flyovers and just broadening the roads. I mean, so long as we take care of the people, it's enjoyable for people to walk. Will be sustainable. Look.
And Prashant, I think just to add on, it's about changing the mindset. It's not about individual transit. I think collective transit, because we have been fighting. Earlier, we have been saying that, okay, reduce the fossil fuels and come into a common transit system. That's when the metro and other things actually was justified. Once that mindset changes, that it's not about me having a personal car and driving from a distance A to point B. If a common transit could actually bring in a lot of people together and optimally used, I think that's going to reduce a lot of load, whether it is environmentally or otherwise. So,
absolutely. So sustainable transportation will not only improve the pricing of real estate assets, it may also make real estate more valuable, both psychologically, financially, economically, and socially. Gentlemen, what a delight to bring you to this room. Avi, thank you very much for organizing this session. Thank you very much. Dr. Coulson, have a wonderful day. Anil and Lok, please enjoy your dinner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.